So here I am today to talk about ADHD and moving our interventions from clinics to schools. And I'll start with disclosures, and basically these are funding sources that might have funded some of the research that you're going to hear about, recent funding that I've had, and yeah, across different, NIMH and Institute of Education Sciences both have been really wonderful sources for me. Okay, here's the outline that we're going to talk about today. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about the significance of ADHD, the status of behavioral interventions in treating ADHD. I'll describe our work developing and evaluating combined school-home interventions, and as well as the key rationale components of the Collaborative Life Skills Program, which is CLS, as well as the evidence, and then our future adaptations and conclusions. All right. First of all, why is ADHD significant? ADHD is significant because it's a worldwide problem in addition to other complexities it presents. I mean, this is data from the CDC. I looked for the latest numbers, and this looks to be it from 2019. And you can see it's prevalent everywhere. And in fact, it's probably one of the most common reasons for referral to clinics and for school services. And not only are these children presenting with concerns about ADHD, but more often than not, they're also presenting with comorbid conditions or other disorders, which you can see with this graph as well. Most often it's behavioral conduct problems, but we also see other comorbid conditions, as you can see from this slide, anxiety and depression being among the more common. And these other disorders bring additional challenges and risks, which are all over the, sort of a gamut of areas, beginning in childhood and extending through adulthood in many cases. We can think about academic impairments. These kids are at eightfold increased risk for dropping out of high school. Their problems begin, though, in elementary school and extend from difficulty completing work to poor grades, et cetera, and over time it can become exacerbated. The social concerns with peers are well known. Often these children have trouble making and keeping friends, and they might be rejected from their peer group or neglected in the case of the inattentive type. The family problems we know about as being characterized by conflict, but also we see ADHD, of course, run in families. So when you're working with a child with ADHD, chances are there may be a family history in the mix, or vice versa. So that presents challenges. And as I mentioned, the problems extend to adulthood, and so occupational concerns become common. These individuals are at greater risk of being fired, losing work, being underemployed, even if they're not unemployed, and that could extend through their adult lives. The financial burdens are great. You can see 5 times greater economic burden on families, with societal cost in over many billions. And other risks include driving risks in terms of getting tickets, having accidents, and health risks. We know now life expectancy is reduced for this group by on average 8.4 years, and it could be a result of accidental injuries. There's substance abuse in the mix, and as well as mental health outcomes that can be problematic in demoralization, low self-esteem, and all sorts of things. So we're concerned about this group for lots of reasons. And I'm going to mention a few areas in particular because they're going to have relevance for how we designed our treatment protocols. And one is a little bit more about family impairment. These families are at increased risk for conflict and stress, as you could see, and what you see is this kind of vicious cycle. So you've got kids being non-compliant, even if it's not on purpose, not defiant, but they're also inadvertently getting into trouble, and parents are more likely in response to issue more commands, become less positive, more negative, and then the cycle continues. Executive functioning problems, also characteristic of this group of kids, even if it's not part of the DSM. A lot of the sort of impairment areas are likely related to these executive functioning problems. with impairments in time management and organizing things and keeping things together and persisting to get things done, and the whole sort of gamut of EF difficulties. In addition to EF problems, there are motivational differences which are very interesting. We know from a number of experimental studies that kids with ADHD versus not ADHD respond differently to rewards and punishments. They're less responsive to partial or inconsistent reinforcement, which is kind of normal living, which is not expecting reinforcement and needing it for each of your behavior actions. There's a higher threshold for reward, and you can see from this graph that there's a difference in response depending upon the delay between their action and the reinforcer. The longer the delay here, so we start from no delay from their response to reinforcement to longer delay, and what's the reinforcement strength. You can actually see in the beginning here of this graph, if the reinforcement is immediate, the ADHD group may actually be at an advantage. They're highly motivated. They're ready to get in there and do the work, and the reinforcement value is very strong. But as time goes by, that advantage becomes a disadvantage really quickly, and no longer does this reinforcement work to motivate them in the same way because it's too far away. And whereas for the non-ADHD group, even though there's a general decline over time, it's not quite as steep. Okay, so let's look at how well we're treating all of these problems. And we can look at the prevalence. These are the latest CDC estimates. You can see lots of variability, which is very interesting, across our country. The diagnoses vary by region. So you're going to see many more diagnoses in the southern states, as you can tell, and California and Nevada are on the low end. And these are all based on parent report of whether their child currently had ADHD based on a national survey that CDC was administering. How does treatment vary? Yes, that varies too. And what you can see on the left-hand part of this slide are parent reports of behavior therapy for their child with ADHD in the past 12 months. So what was the percentage of parents who reported their child had ADHD, who also reported their child received behavior therapy? There's some variability there, and you can see the California estimates are about a little bit less than half of that group is receiving behavior therapy. And they're looking particularly at behavior therapy and medication in this survey because these are the two evidence-based treatments for ADHD. Behavior therapy, we'll say, maybe combines a few sort of types of behavior therapy, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in general, those are the two solid evidence-based approaches. And what you can see from this, presentation is that less than half are receiving either behavior therapy, less than half are receiving medication in our state. And in fact, about 28% are not receiving anything. They're not getting one of these evidence-based treatments that our research community has worked so hard to develop. Okay? And on the other hand, you'll see there's greater medication use in the country as a whole, 62%, but still you're getting varied rates depending upon what part of the country you're looking at, with the southern states having the highest medication use. But behavior therapy across the U.S. and in California are quite similar. Okay. What about school services for ADHD? What does the picture look like there? And here, 1 in 5 students do not receive any school services despite impairment for their ADHD. Less than 40% of those who do receive services receive behavioral interventions. Most school services for ADHD are not evidence-based, as you could tell, and they include things like individual or small group counseling with little involvement of parents and teachers. So that's concerning. What should they be receiving? What does the science tell us about what these kids should be receiving? And what you see here is a list of the empirically supported, well-established psychosocial behavioral treatments for ADHD. And the citations at the bottom include sort of, Steve Evans had a nice summary of these interventions in their classification, and many investigators who have been working in this area have also published manuals describing the evidence-based procedures that they are that they've developed. And these fall into the following classifications: classroom behavior management, behavioral parent training, organizational skills, peer interventions, and combinations of all of these. Most of these interventions were developed by university researchers. Even the classroom behavior management, often developed in specialized classrooms, sometimes not even in an actual school, sometimes off-campus settings. And both classroom behavior management and behavioral parent training, for those that are of you that might be less familiar, generally involve making sort of environmental changes that help children better regulate their attention and behavior. So you think about modifying the antecedents and the consequences of behavior, and providing more structure, more reminders, or more variety of routines and interventions that can help these children. Organizational skills training is directly provided to the student and is kind of like what it sounds. Learning how to use assignment books, learning how to structure working on assignments, to see it through to the end, and organizing materials and all sorts of things like that. Peer interventions involve those that are evidence-based have a pretty heavy behavioral sort of management component in addition to social skills or peer relationship building. It's usually not what we think of as just an after-school social skills group. It's something usually a bit more intensive than that in terms of showing evidence for effectiveness. What we can say about the studies here is we have a number of meta-analyses looking at psychosocial treatments for ADHD, combining the work of many studies, many randomized clinical trials. And what you can see here is that the treatment effects vary mostly from moderate to large effects, depending upon the study and the design and all sorts of variability there. For externalizing behavior outcomes, for academic-related outcomes, a little bit less powerful on those types of outcomes. Organizational skills have a strong response, as well as parenting skills. Now, one thing that's interesting here is we can look at these meta-analyses and reviews of really this is a voluminous literature. And we could sort of break it up into, let's look first at the intervention modalities. So here we've got the behavior parent training, we've got classroom management, we have the combined interventions with behavioral parent training, classroom behavior management, and child skills training. And then we can look at all of these outcomes that people often look at in these studies. And what do you notice here? Well, what happens is you notice that you have situation specificity in the effects of these interventions. So if you look down the column of behavioral parent training outcomes, you're going to see the ones that are significant are those that are those where the outcomes are based on parent report. So looking at the key at the bottom, P refers to parent report, teacher, T for teacher report, and the OBS for blinded observation or observer. And so what you see here is for behavioral parent training, you get effects at home per parent report. For classroom behavior management, you can get effects in the classroom based on teacher report. And it'll take the combined, everything together, working across settings to get the effects across both parents and teachers, but with effects across both home and school. So that's sort of the standout from the analyses that we and the studies that we've seen so far. So that brings us to the kind of somewhat probably obvious question now. Why do we move psychosocial EBTs, evidence-based treatments for ADHD, from clinics to schools? And it's because clinic-based, evidence-based treatments lack generalized effects at schools. And of course, we all know that there are accessibility problems. I don't know for sure about Davis, but I can tell you for sure what our wait list looks like at UCSF means not many people who could benefit coming for services can't get in. The wait lists are just way too long. So we've got accessibility problems, not to mention insurance is an issue for some as well. Why else do we want to move to schools? Schools are the first-line providers of mental health care. In fact, studies show that 70% of children get their mental health care at schools. And it's a logical setting for care delivery, because, especially for ADHD, because schools are the place where kids will sort of exhibit their problems, and it's in those settings that one needs to intervene where the problems are occurring. So that makes sense. Usual services in the school settings are insufficient and not evidence-based, which I mentioned. Now, there's some efforts in schools to train maybe their mental health workers, maybe teachers, so they get professional development days, they get one-day trainings, but it's not working to transfer these evidence-based practices, evidence-based treatments into practice. And it's instead the train and hope model. So they get all this training, they spend 1 or 2 days learning all these great strategies, and then they go back to the classroom or they go back to their schools, and there's no sort of sustainability, because they're just really not getting the training that they need. So when, as we know from evidence-based training models, you really need a coaching component. You need somebody giving you feedback about how you're doing it in order to really reach the levels of fidelity that you need to reach in order to have an impact. Okay, why else do we want to move things? Parents in schools are really important for optimizing educational outcomes, but they're underutilized and underinvolved. And often, what I found in my work in schools, when I first started working in San Francisco Unified School District, even the mental health staff had not really been working with parents very routinely or consistently, and weren't necessarily all that comfortable with it. Some of them really weren't not in the way they were comfortable working with the students. And that might be even more so with teachers. Finally, moving the interventions to schools may reduce barriers to engagement and adherence. So, they're transporting their kids to school anyway, so they'll be there. And the timing might be better. The child care won't be an issue because your kids might be in school already. Perhaps less stigma and less distrust. Okay. So this brings us to really what I want to share with you today is the program that we've developed over the last 20 years, basically. And we started with, first of all, combining existing EBTs. So you can kind of see here, this is what was going on in the 1990s. We had these kind of isolated evidence-based practices, parent training, classroom management, and some child skills training. And in fact, there was even a really large study, the MTA study, which probably some of you, maybe most of you know about, focused really on the ADHD combined type. And that was the first huge, large-scale trial funded by NIMH to look at behavioral and medication treatments for ADHD. And so they developed a very intensive behavioral treatment arm for their program. But again, it was just for the combined type. And so there was the group that was left behind were the kids that were inattentive without having the hyperactivity and impulsivity. They didn't qualify for participation in that trial, and really there was little or nothing out there looking at any kind of intervention for that group. So it was at that time we decided, let's pull together what we know might be, what these evidence-based treatments might look like, make some adaptations, scale it down so it's something feasible that we could actually do. I mean, MTA was like an incredibly intensive intervention that's really hard to scale up in terms of the behavioral component. So, but with so our focus was on developing something along those lines. And so our approach was a clinic-based approach. The components were delivered by a PhD-level psychologist. We're working out of a university setting. I did this program at UCSF. And, we made some modifications or adaptations to address the specific issues of the inattentive type. We did go out to schools to meet with teachers and set up programming there. But otherwise, the families came into the clinic, the kids came into the clinic, and that's where we did most of the intervention. So then time passes, we were showing some good results from this, and I was asked by San Francisco Unified to present an in-service on ADHD. And this was in 2007. And so I went out, yeah, that's great, I'll go out. And I present the in-service, and it was right after that one of the lead social workers who was there said, oh, what we'd really like you to do you think you'd be willing to train our social workers in what you just talked about? I thought, oh, that's interesting, because coincidentally, right at the same time, IES, Institute of Education Sciences, was kind of a newish institute, and they were taking on the sort of science end of the U.S. Department of Education, and they were really interested in treatment development. And so I said to the district, yes, I'd be happy to, but wouldn't you love to be part of a research trial, and we can do it that way. And so that's what I did. That's how I got my first grant from IES, and that's how I started this collaboration with SFUSD, which has been really wonderful over this since intervening years. And so we basically developed this program to be all school administered. So instead of having our PhD level psychologists do it all, it was going to be all the school clinicians implementing this program. And for this sort of iteration of it, the district was really interested in meeting as many kids with ADHD as possible, so let's open it up for not just inattentive, let's open it up for all types, and see if we can sort of make something that would be suitable for more comers within the district. So I said, sure, we'll do that. So here we are. This was a development grant. This was sort of the process of the development. It was an iterative process. We had like 5 cohorts of 2 schools. We would train our social workers. They'd implement it. We'd evaluate it. We'd revise it. And we got looped through this process until we landed with our CLS program, which is similar to what we developed for the inattentive, and that involves our 3 components: the child component, parent component, and teacher component, and again, all administered by the school clinician. And it's all administered simultaneously. I mean, not literally at exactly the same time, but within the same week they were exposed to each of the components. So the child component involved teaching skills to support academic and social, emotional, behavioral functioning, and the parent and the teacher component was intended to not just teach antecedent and consequent strategies to improve their motivation, which I talked about, mentioned before as being an area of concern, and also use some of these sort of scaffolding and strategies to support executive functioning deficits. In addition, they were brought on to really reinforce the generalization of the skills that the kids were learning in their own groups. So you put all of it together, everybody working together for the purpose of these outcomes in focusing on improving our ADHD behaviors as well as the academic and social impairments. So altogether, this coordinates teachers and parents to provide the supports and scaffolding for integrated, round-the-clock treatment, school and home. So I'll walk through each of these components. You can see what's involved. So the first component here, the school component, is includes teacher strategies. So we meet with the teachers as a group and go over certain education around ADHD and behavioral interventions. We tailor each program for each student through a classroom challenge is sort of what we call a daily report card. We call it a classroom challenge. And we set up homework plans. We set up evidence-based classroom management. We go over, how to give, teaching the teachers how to give labeled praise, how to give direct instructions, all the kinds of strategies we kind of teach in our behavioral parent training classes. we include in teaching to teachers as well. And in fact, we're not teaching. This is the school clinician we're teaching. So you're going to see the challenge. First, it's not us giving it. So we have to first train the clinician, and the clinician's the one who implements everything. And here's a little bit of what our classroom challenge looks like. We had little binders that have target behaviors, and we give them like a list of target behaviors they can choose from, asterisk some of the items that are really common and sort of our popular target behaviors for the kids. And of course, I won't be able to read it, but completing classrooms, starting right away, staying on task, all sorts of things. And they would identify these target behaviors and then really carefully define them according to specific rules around, well, you can earn your points, but you need to make sure you're meeting your target behavior with no more than 1 or 2 reminders. So we're very, very specific about all of this. And then the kids the teachers would monitor this several times a day, 3 points actually, and then it goes home to the parent. And then at the bottom, you'll see spot for parent signature, teacher signature, everybody signs, and then the parent indicates whether they rewarded at home. So that's the general format. That went back and forth. In the child component, they met in a small group right there on the school sites. They were pulled from their classrooms, usually as off in the afternoon, so they weren't missing a super important academic period. And they'd go off into their own group, 8 to 9 weekly 40-minute groups, and where they would learn organizational skills, interpersonal skills, role plays, and skill practice and free play to sort of practice what they're learning about. And their skill use was rewarded at home. And you'll see the parents are learning about what skill were they learning that week, and that they rewarded that skill use at home. And that happened at school too, because oftentimes the skills they were learning, if they were a problem for that child, that would appear as a target behavior on their classroom challenge. So then it became rewarded there too. And you could see the list of skills that we taught them: good sportsmanship, following routines, accepting, and so on. And as I said, they learn 1 or 2 a week, and they learn about them through role plays, through practice sort of skill games and things like that. And you can just see some of our materials there on the bottom. They had a little morning routine role play. That was a lot of fun. Cleaning backpacks, running through homework routines, all sorts of things. We make it fun. Kids like it. And there's a behavior management component, including our group rules. We can see pay attention is a very emphasized rule in this group. And in fact, we have attention checks so that the leaders of the groups would be presenting information, or the kids would be responding, and they would call for an attention check, and if a child gets it right, was able to repeat back what they heard or answer the question, that meant that they could shoot a ball in the box that says shoot for the stars. Super fun, they love it, even though, it's pretty simple. And so this sort of gives you an idea of the behavior management component. And now for the parent component, very much like behavioral parent training, there's 8 to 10 weekly groups. The parents come on campus. That's where they have their groups. It's usually, probably most often at drop-off in the morning. Kids go to their classroom, the parents go to the library or some other room where they meet with the group of other parents, and then go through the curriculum that includes a variety of skills that I'll show you in a second. And they're also learning and teaching or learning about the skills that the students are learning about so that they can reinforce them, and they're learning to work with the school in a way to be successful. And here are some of the skills. It's using the ABC model. Again, if you're at all familiar with behavioral parent training, this will look super familiar because it basically includes most of the content of behavioral parent training, plus a couple extra things which include stress management, strategies for reinforcing the child skill of the week. Some work with the teachers. We've developed teaching methods over time. We've sort of enlisted actors to teach our skills. So we have demonstration videos showing effective and ineffective strategy use. That's been helpful. And we've developed these handouts. We keep making new renditions of them. We even have flashier ones now, I think. Less text, we try to get less text. There's still a little text heavy on the praise handout. But basically that's available for each of the skills that we're teaching. They all develop a home challenge. I think when-then home challenges are the most popular, but some do point systems, and they can integrate it with their classroom challenge point system. And here they're taught to sort of set up 2 columns, when-then contingencies, so you can see for routines, when I do all these things, then I can choose something. So it's pretty simple, and most of our families are able to complete this kind of a challenge at home that would target concerns that they're experiencing at home. All right, so I think it's the linkage of all of these components for generalization that becomes very important. To me, this is really the secret sauce. Otherwise, this is really basic stuff. We know a lot of these things work, but it's bringing everyone together that does not happen. Most services are very disjointed, so the parents might find a parent group or be able to get some parent training, but it's not connected really in a seamless way with what goes on in the classroom. And we know it's not going, whatever they learn isn't going to generalize to the classroom. And the reverse is true too. There might be some great teachers that that the students have each year, from one year to the next. They might have some great teachers with some good behavioral programming, but if the parent isn't involved, it's not going to generalize to the concerns at home. So we put a lot of emphasis on cross-setting prompting and reinforcement. So the clinicians who are leading the group, the first thing they do at the beginning of the group each week would be go over the classroom challenge. They meet individually with each child, see how they're doing on their target behaviors, and be able to prompt and reinforce them, encourage them, and hear a little bit about the home too. And they can do high fives throughout the day at school, and again, prompting and reminding them. That's not something clinicians can do. They're not at school. They can't do that kind of thing. The parents can reinforce at home their classroom challenge, set up their own programs at home, and the teachers also, actually we've had a fair number of situations where the parents had set up target behaviors at home and the teachers rewarded it in the classroom. Like, for example, a morning routine as a way to prompt kids being on time for school. And so that kind of reinforcement program is also really helpful. Okay, so maybe you're wondering, how do we get school clinicians who really don't have much of a background with parent training, they haven't been trained in it, to learn all of this stuff, that our PhD psychologists have learned, through repeated exposures in their clinics and all of that. So this is probably the tricky part. How do we get all that to happen? So we first started completely in-person training. And so you can see that notebook up there on the upper right. That's our little fat notebook. It contains all the scripted materials. And every session we would script out, and we would edit the scripts. If it was too much for one clinician, not enough for another, that can be an endless process. But everything was very well defined. We developed a library of sample sessions so that we would record everything. We video record everything. And so we have some really cool sessions that the new clinicians, as they learn the model, can see other clinicians doing. They can see it in action, and it can help them feel like this is something I can learn how to do too, which I think is really empowering. We run training workshops before we start the program, which is about a day. Sometimes we break it up into multiple days. And we do live coaching, fidelity, and feedback. We would go out to every session they do. We drive all around San Francisco to the elementary schools and sit in the parent group and sit in the child group and sit in the meetings that the teachers would have with the parents and the kids and the parents. And we'd keep track of fidelity, and we would sort of coach along the way if there were questions that came up. And we would meet with the clinician afterwards and talk about how it went and give feedback. And then we would have weekly consultation with the clinicians as well that was usually paired with another peer from the district, working at a different school, but a peer. And I think that's kind of a nice model too, that they're sharing the experiences that in learning this model with each other. So that was all in person. So in 2017, we moved to a remote training format. We, with funding from IES again, we developed a video conferencing approach and a website so that, for obvious reasons, we were never going to get out of San Francisco if we didn't do that. And so you could see kind of a depiction of what the website looked like. You could download all the materials. You could see us little video conferencing. That was before Zoom was a thing. You know, that was in 2019, 18, something like that. So it wasn't quite as seamless back then, but we were successful in launching this program to evaluate and compare how the remote training might compare to the in-person training. Sadly, of course, COVID hit, and that was right as we finished our first sort of cohort of randomized schools to either the in-person or the remote, so I never actually was able to finish the trial. But I'll share a few of the results just from the remote training arm. So here are some examples of some of the research supporting CLS efficacy. And there's also, we have our website, and many of these articles are right there as well, but I'll walk you through what some of the results are here. I'm sort of combining both CLS and CLSR. Remember, CLSR is the remote training approach, and that's remote training of the school clinicians. The school clinicians actually still deliver everything on site. So basically that meant that we zoomed into all their sessions, which I didn't describe. We zoomed into all their sessions. So there was a laptop in the child group room, in the parent group room, and in the meetings with the teachers. And we would view these sessions from our offices and check fidelity and provide feedback that way. Okay. So what are we finding? So this is the sort of demographics of our San Francisco sample. We've been in over 45 schools, over 275. It's all elementary age, 2nd to 5th grade. Variety of, it's a diverse population. You can see that, the racial and ethnic diversity there. I mean, the one thing that's notable here, which might be a little bit different than some samples, is that the percentage of students on medication is relatively low. I mean, I showed you the California data on medication use, so maybe it's not shocking, but still, it's pretty low. But San Francisco might be just lower, even California being low. I mean, San Francisco even lower still. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We took all comers. If they were on medication, that was completely fine. So this was just where we landed. So as we go through this, we can ask how, first of all, is this program feasible? So I described to you all the training that we did, what the parents were doing. They were coming to these sessions. The kids were coming. The teachers were involved. And it's like quick and dirty. In some ways, it's quick and dirty training because it wasn't as if they had a practice group to do. They were learning in the line of fire. So they would start the group, and then we would be meeting each week to teach them what to do for the next week. And out of all that, you can see this fidelity is really high. The content fidelity is high. It's over 90%. And they all came to the trainings. I mean, they probably were afraid not to because they were going to have to face this group and not know what to do if they didn't come to the trainings. But so that all is looking good. Our parent group attendance is in the 76-79% range. And I'm giving you a range because we had a few different trials that have happened. We had our open trial to start with. We had our randomized trial in there. We had our CLSR open trial as well. So this is sort of combining all of that. The parents in general report using the strategies most days. They sign their daily report cards. We'd go in and take photos of the daily report cards. We'd go on campus, take the photos, and see, check, did you sign it? And greater than 70% of these classroom challenges were signed. Child attendance, of course, that's very good. They're right there at the school. And the teacher completed the DRC on more than 73% of possible days, which is great. Some people don't find, if you use DRC, sometimes they hear, oh, they don't, they don't want to do the DRC, or they, are not as consistent with it. But in this program, remember, everybody's working together, the teachers know the parents are involved, everybody knows everybody's involved, and so it might have motivated a higher usage rate. And more than 90% had about 2 meetings with parent students to review the DRC. So the teachers would meet with the parents and students after school, I mean, we're up against union issues too there in San Francisco, especially some of the schools were a little more stringent than others, and so you had to really condense that meeting because the teachers were going to have to run. But we fit it in. Okay, so let's look at, is the program effective? And we see significant improvement here for the CLS condition relative to the BAU condition. Here at the top, CLS, BAU, which is business as usual. What is business as usual? Well, that's all those services that I described before that don't really work that well. There's no evidence for them. So it's the school counseling. Most of them are getting something, accommodations, some kind of individual or group counseling of some sort. But when you look at the pre-post differences here, there's a difference, even though they all improve. Now, I will say, and at follow-up, these differences maintained per parent report. Teacher report was a little different story. So we had immediate improvements after treatment, but at follow-up, which was the next school year, which was with a new teacher, and at the, sort of in the fall of the year, we didn't see significant differences at that point. Both groups kind of started joining together. So there could be a variety of explanations for why that might be the case, but it was earlier in the year than we had collected baseline measures. Here's another way to look at it. That's just ADHD symptoms. Here you can see the percentage of students improved into the normative range at post-treatment per parent and teacher report. And you could see that, well, these are all significant differences, so it's showing that a higher percentage fell into the normative range for the CLS group as compared to the BAU group. And that was per parent and teacher report. And we also gathered observational data looking at classroom engagement and off-task behaviors. We were using what's called a BOSS observational coding system. So we had research assistants go into the classroom and observe and rate the students' behavior, and they didn't know which students were receiving CLS or BAU. And so we can see here that those with the greatest improvement were those that were receiving the treatment. Now we can switch over to the remote group. So that's all the in-person training group. When you look at the remote group, we find somewhat similar results in terms of child outcomes. So here are the percentage of students improved within the normative range at post-treatment, both parent and teacher rated, across symptoms and areas of impairment, not too different than what we had for the in-person, and we weren't expecting differences. But then here we can look at the school clinician outcomes, and we were interested in this. Are we impacting their motivation to use the program? Are we improving their confidence? Are we improving their knowledge? And what you see, their motivation was pretty high, regardless, so we didn't get differences. But for the confidence and knowledge piece, we did get differences for each of the components, parent component, teacher component, and child component, showing improvements following treatment. And so you can kind of see these were comments around the professional development that they really appreciated it, and they really do every time. That's been a consistent theme. And right now, the way we recruit social workers to participate in the studies is often just word of mouth. Like they talk to another school clinician in the district and talk about the program, and then we get newcomers that way. Of course, they liked Zoom. We all like that aspect to it in some ways. How about, was the program acceptable? And here, the parents, teachers, students, and clinicians were all pretty uniform in being very positive about the program. Parents really appreciate that teamness, that team aspect to help guide their child And my child learned to focus during class. As a result, he started to come home from school happy. That's really cool. That's what makes this work so fun, because this stuff actually works, you know, and so it's really reinforcing to the researchers too. All right. Well, so lots of positive effects, but there certainly some variability. Not everybody wasn't improved to within the normative range at post-treatment and follow-up, as you saw. So what factors predict positive treatment effects? So we take a look at that. Well, it turns out, not a big surprise, teacher adherence predicts positive treatment outcomes at home and school. So if we looked at school clinician, SMHP is school mental health provider. So if we look at the school mental health provider's ratings of teacher adherence, what we found is that the greater adherence reported, the greater improvement on observational measures, on parent ratings, and even on teacher ratings. And this is just looking at the percentage of days the classroom challenge was completed, and that correlated or predicted the organizational skills improvements that the parents reported. We also saw that parent adherence predicts positive treatment outcomes too. And here, this was an interesting study. Melissa Dvorsky led this study and was interested in sort of trajectories of adherence. And so at the bottom are the weeks of the program, and then on the y-axis you see the frequency of parent strategy use, from not at all to most days or all days. And what she found is there's kind of three different trajectories. One being the low, moderate, and stable, which is the blue. Another being the high and increasing, which is the green. And then the low to high rapid increasing, which is the olive. Okay, and then what you see here is if you look at what happens here at the end of treatment and their post-treatment ratings, you find that increasing skill use trajectories were associated with greater improvements in, across the board, child behavior, academic competence, as well as a number of parenting dimensions at post-treatment and at follow-up. And these post-treatment ratings here of strategy use predicted follow-up. So that was exciting. And the other thing that's kind of interesting here is what you can see, what happens around week 4 or 5. It starts to kind of level out. You're kind of like decided into one of these trajectories. And so it becomes really critical to think about what kind of improvement and what kind of strategy use is happening by week 4 or 5, because that's going to predict a lot in terms of the child outcomes at post-treatment, as well as sustained improvement at follow-up. So we look at parent adherence. Now we want to look at, well, what's predicting parent adherence? What can we do? And so Lauren Friedman took the lead on this question in evaluating parent ADHD and anxiety depression at baseline, and how did these factors affect parent adherence. And so we could see pretty strong relationships there in that both parent anxiety and depression and ADHD predicted parent adherence, whether you ask the parents about it or whether you ask the clinician about it. So greater parent anxiety, depression, and ADHD at baseline predicts less parent adherence to treatment. And then we can look at mediator effects. And we pulled up our class data for this, which I'm showing you because I think it sort of completes the story about how important changes in parenting practices are and what's related to that. So what we have seen in these studies is look at is that improvements in positive and negative parenting over the course of the treatment led to, that's what sort of mediated improved child organization, parenting, and daily hassles. And the additional piece, which is important to keep in mind, is that improved self-efficacy and a reduction in cognitive errors. So parents feeling more self-confident and assured that they can use these strategies, and sort of ridding themselves of those negative self-comments, unhelpful things they say to themselves about how this will never work, or he or she's doing this on purpose to annoy me, nothing, you know, the future for my child is bleak. I mean, all this kind of unhelpful thinking, the more you can reduce that, the more improved parenting you'll have. More improved parenting you'll have, the more improvements the child will have. Okay, so that's sort of the roundabout through our basic CLS program and the CLSR version. And then more recently, I had mentioned that that one trial was shut down with COVID. And so what did we do? Well, we had, like everybody else, we had to pivot to a tele-behavioral health kind of approach. So we took the parent training component and used our website, so the parents could still access all the materials on the website, and used the video conferencing approach, which we're all using now, Zoom groups basically, and evaluated the program in sort of a pilot study, looking at the program in 4 schools and 4 clinicians, and with 5 to 6 families per school. And we found similar fidelity, so the clinicians were reading the script from the screen. They did a good job, very good job, and they greater than 90%, 98%, they might have even done better. Now, one thing I thought was interesting, maybe you'll find this too, is that average parent attendance was really high. I mean, look at that, 94%. But I will say that this was done during COVID, so everybody's stuck at home. It's like, oh, good news, I get to go on a Zoom group, parent group, everybody's excited by that possibility. Maybe I don't know if it's still happening now. I will say we continue, after sort of the promising results of this trial, that prompted us to do more Zoom groups for another trial that I'll describe in a second. And I don't think the attendance is not 94%. It's not quite that high anymore. But anyway, our homework adherence was about the same as the in-person groups. And our outcomes are showing significant reductions pre to post for ADHD symptoms, just like we found with the in-person groups, and impairment also improved. And you can see the satisfaction ratings there are pretty high across the board. This is clinicians and parents kind of all appreciate the group in much the same way they did for the in-person groups. And the clinicians reported that they thought this was feasible, and the Zoom groups were moderately easy to use. Okay, what about when we ask them what's their preference for doing this group remotely or via Zoom? And so you get 2/3 of the parents saying that they slightly or strongly prefer the Zoom group, the remote group. You get a little bit in the middle of no preference, and then you get, a solid 23.9%, almost a quarter, saying that they strongly prefer in person. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, with comments about, obvious logistical advantage of the Zoom groups, but recognizing I'm probably not going to be paying attention quite as closely in a Zoom group as I would in person, which of course you can kind of tell sometimes. And then in some cases, parents really prefer in person because they really miss that connection to others, and they think that the learning might be compromised. What happens when we ask the school clinicians? Well, the school clinicians, none of them preferred the in-person. I'll say that they all preferred either do it remote next time or I'll do either one. But nobody said that they wanted to do in-person exclusively. And when you're doing these groups in the school setting, there's some logistical challenges. The clinicians have to go find rooms, there has to be space, they have to coordinate the whole thing. So in some ways, it's easier for them to do the remote group as well. So these promising results led us to do our next study, which is developing a parenting app to support parent adherence in a Zoom format. So we did this study that we're just kind of wrapping up. We conducted all of our groups via Zoom. And here we developed this app over the course of a couple of years with all the challenge that comes with that. If people out here are familiar with that process, it's challenging. But our focus here on developing this app was to try to find a way to increase adherence across with our parents, because we know how important of a predictor that is. And so the app was designed to do that with sort of tools for helping parents set their own parenting goals and monitoring those. There's a digitized reward system for the kids. We've got prompting and motivational messaging for the parents. We have problem-solving guides so they can kind of run through an ABC model on the app and get suggestions for what they might want to do differently to solve their problems. So you can kind of see a couple examples here of the adult, the parent face is on top and different tools around that they can access, and then there's a child version as well. We've got in-app rewards. We also have kind of this reward system where parents and kids can download photos of actual rewards the kids might want to learn and earn in real life, and they can work for those in the app as well. So there's lots of different bells and whistles, and initial findings are supporting the usability, acceptability, and utility, and as a group. And you could see comments around, parents liking, this kind of increased accountability that they find using this tool. But we did find and we're still analyzing the data, so I'm not in the position to present our comparison of our trial where we compared use of the tool with our parent training versus parent training alone. But what I can say is there's a fair amount of variability in parents' use of the app. So you've got like super users, oh my, they're using it all the time. It's just like, whew. And then there's others that don't use it that much. And so what we'll probably be doing is taking a deep dive to look at, are those super users seeing improvements to a greater extent than the parents who are not using it or using it rarely. And here in my most recent project, we're joining forces on a Alacrity Center. It's called the InStep Center, and this was housed down at UC San Diego, led by Lauren Brookman-Frazee as well as Greg Arendt. And the idea is to apply team enhancements across various conditions and interventions. So our project is the signature R01 of this center. And so what we've been doing this past year is developing team enhancements, including a team charter, handoff protocols, team performance monitoring, and developing another digitized DRC protocol that we think is better than what we used on our remote trial, which had some problems with it. And using that, and then sort of better defining our teams and the roles that they play. Now you could see from our prior work and the slide that I showed you that some of the parent comments are around how they really appreciated the teamness of CLS. So here we're trying to make that experience true for everybody who's participating in this program and elevate it even a little bit more, because we have a tough comparison. We're going to be comparing this team-enhanced version of CLS to CLS only. This is a dual-site trial, so we're bringing in a new school district. That's new. So now we're working with National School District down in San Diego, which we can do because we have our remote training, and as well as San Francisco Unified. And so that's been really interesting, really great, working with a different district. And one of our postdocs teams is also taking a look at psychological safety in the context of this trial to see whether there might be aspects to learn about diverse racial ethnic teams. They are particularly focused on Asian American and Latinx populations, and to what extent they're feeling safety in the context of these teams, and in our team enhancement, helping them to feel more part of the community in their participation in the program. And finally, I wanted to mention the CLS program has been translated to Spanish. We've tried it in U.S. schools, and Lauren Hack, who's former postdoc, now on faculty at UCSF, has fully developed this program out in Mexico, calls it CLS Fuerte, and has been in over 19 schools with many students, has made some cultural adaptations to the program, but it's substantively very similar. In fact, We use so many of the same handouts. It's just that hers are in Spanish, ours are in English. It's really funny. I look on Canva, that's where the program we use for all our fancy handouts, and I can see the different versions for everything. So, there's basic similarities between the two of them, and she's basically finding the beneficial effects in the same way that we have here in the U.S. In Mexico. And then her website is there and describes some more of the specific work she's done and the publications there at the bottom. And she's hoping for a scale-up project to be funded soon to expand this even farther to 26 schools in 2 Mexican states. So that'll be very exciting. And then we're also looking to expand our digital supports for CLS and under-resourced schools, which we're hoping to launch that project next year as well. Okay, so what can we conclude? Well, first of all, what about feasibility? Well, what we learned, CLS can be successfully implemented by existing staff at school sites, and technology enhancements can further increase that feasibility. So yes, even though it involves lots of moving parts, it is feasible. How effective is it? It's effective in improving symptoms and impairments, and outperforms what the kids are usually getting. And by a significant amount, it outperforms. But we know the parent and teacher involvement and adherence are really critical for making that success happen. Acceptability is high. We usually get pretty much positive reviews from those who participate in the program across our stakeholders. So what do we do now? Training and redeploying school resources from non-empirically approaches to non-empirically supported practices to those with documented efficacy holds promise for increased access and utilization of effective treatments. We've demonstrated that. These were all school clinicians at their school site doing other things before we ever came on. Now they're doing less of those other things and moving over to more of these. So it's not like it's costing more, right? It's just that they're using their time differently. So the final point is policies that emphasize funding for school mental health and other systems of care are needed so that these services and training are accessible to all youth and families who need them. And so many thanks to all of my collaborators on the CLS program. I have a slew of wonderful current and former fellows that have really been key and instrumental in helping this program take off, and many have gone on to their own wonderful careers. And some, like I said, Lauren is using the program in novel ways, which is truly exciting to see. Faculty at UCSF, my coordinators, partners at SFUSD, and my new partners at SDSU.
One of my questions is how you were successful going in that first school,
right,
and able to maintain that over so many years, because there's changes in who the administrators are.
Right.
So how do you maintain that buy-in?
Really good point, because it has happened. Like, schools are like that. They're fluid entities, and, you get principals changing. We just had I've gone through a few key liaison folks at the district, and right now I'm in a little bit of a land of let's see what happens currently, but still pushing through because I have relationships. I will say that I was on site, I was there a lot. It was me who was out there doing it. It wasn't like somebody else, it was a team, but I was a part of it because, my heart and soul was into this. So I wanted to establish those relationships and make sure that they were solid. So that's one thing. And you can see that the clinicians saw all of us there and being committed to them and helping them. So this project was well received because we were giving them something. And that's why we were there. They wanted us there. That was the initial invitation. So it's different if it's a district. I don't know that this is, we'll see, How would this work in a district that doesn't really want you there, Doesn't really want the help, That's a different, that's probably going to be something we're going to need to, think about. But I think that, and so we were invited. We had a lot of presence at the school sites. Now with Zoom and Zoom training, see, that's another different wrinkle. That initial relationship may be a little bit more difficult to establish if it's all established remotely. But I think those, and seeing the positive effects of the program. And the social workers are all, we had a social work, a school mental health presence at San Francisco Unified. That's not always present at every district, right? So we had, at each school site, they have either part-time or full-time mental health provider. And they were eager to learn these skills. So that was another thing, too. I mean, there's a lot of things. But
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I was wondering, the way you seem to be measuring success in this is symptoms. Do you have other measures of success, and can you speak to them? Things like school performance, social development of the children, parent depression, child mental health.
Right. So we had, and I presented some of that, but maybe I went through kind of quickly. But we usually collect a slew of outcome data from parents and teachers. So they ask about symptoms, but then also all the areas of impairment. So we're asking about organizational skills, function. We're asking about social skills. We're asking about general impairment, sort of overall clinical impairment. And, the observational measures, I reported some of that. We're doing less of that now. Expensive, tiny budgets. You only have so much. We've asked, we would have weekly ratings we would gather from the kids about how much did, they like a group, how much did they think it helped them. We even asked them, and they're usually pretty positive, but they are getting rewarded right at the same time for just having a successful group there. So maybe that's a confound. So I'd say we're asking about the domains of functioning for, that they've been having difficulty with. And we might have added, we may be adding a few more measures. More people are looking at well-being and those kinds of things
So,
now.
yeah, like well-being, your
I
grades.
know, and,
like
but now,
distal measures.
yeah, so exactly. In terms of academic competence, we've used rating scales like the ACEs and various, that was actually in the SSIS academic competence scale. We incorporated that. We found significant effects on that per teacher rating on the academic, features. So we're getting some of those outcomes. We don't, what can I say? Academic achievement was harder to get. I'm sort of two minds how to explain it. But in the inattentive study, we gathered those data, and there weren't significant findings when you compare the groups, unless you look at those that the small group that showed very significant improvement. Maybe more of those were situated in the treated condition. But academic achievement is a tough nut to crack for these behavioral interventions. So we're not gathering that. We've looked at report card data, but I'll tell you, it's really hard to look at report card data and compare, again, the tendency for teachers to start their kids all out in these low ratings, so there's room for improvement. Yeah. And everybody improves. So, because I don't even know what we're looking at with report card data. So, yeah. So, those are some ideas. Thank you.
I was curious about parent screening or even teacher screening for self-identification for having ADHD themselves, because when you support an adult who has ADHD, you're also supporting the family unit and the child. So I was curious where that's something that's happening, or how those parents are maybe getting additional supports from being part of the program.
Yeah, so we were gathering those measures at baseline. We aren't providing the treatment for ADHD or for other mental health conditions. The schools were the places where this intervention was housed. So it was a little bit different than running a clinical trial, where running a clinical trial in a university setting, we would be supplying families with all those resources. Now we're trying to work in the context of a natural environment. So we would refer those issues back to the school clinician that's on site, and they would have been more likely to follow up with those parents. And we usually give resource lists to the school clinicians, but we're not directly involved with the care of the families ourselves. So that's a little bit of a difference. But I think it's a good point that you're bringing up. And in fact, one of my former postdocs now at ASU, who was the author of the study looking at ADHD and parent depression anxiety as predictors of adherence, is very interested in looking at that ADHD component for parents and developing out an intervention for parents in conjunction with parent training.
I was just curious if there's anything in the works or happening right now that addresses ADHD for older children, like middle school or high school.
Oh, sure. So there's other folks that are working in that area. I've elected to work with a younger group, but there's other, let me think if there's anyone locally, but nationally there's people working in the area of intervention development and evaluations of new interventions. Not terribly dissimilar from what I reported, except they're developmentally different, obviously, because you're working with older kids. But there are resources for that. Like Steve Evans was one of the authors. He's developed a program for high school students. Joshua Langberg has developed an organizational skills program for middle school students. I'm going to leave people out. Pardon me? Yeah, I was going to say Maggie Sibley for high school, and who else? I had that list there for a reason, of course. Now, if it's not right in front of me, I'm not going to remember what's on there. But yeah, there's ideas for you.
You mentioned the behavioral parent training, and I was just curious if you had any specific programs you could recommend.
Right, and there's been a number of different behavior, like a curriculum, or
Yeah, just like the training. This is honestly the first time I'm hearing of it. And so I was just
well,
wondering
I
where
think
to
that
go.
intervention might actually be right here. Am I right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
It's a widely used evidence-based treatment, and I'm sure the folks here, would be great. Yeah.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm actually curious, just logistics in terms of when this training took place. Was it during school hours? Was it, because it's intense, right? There's like 8 trainings a week?
Right, so it's 8, okay, so we started with 10 weeks, we reduced it to 8. We're trying to make it more feasible, right, so that we reduced it to 8. But it's once a week, and the parent groups would be offered usually at the start of the school day. Now with some opting for Zoom groups, they might occur during lunch hour and, maybe later in the afternoon. That's happened too. So it depends upon what is decided for that school community. Oh, I should mention, because I didn't mention this too, one thing unique about this program is that parents are participating with this, with each other. They're all from the same school. So there's already kind of a sense of community there, which I think is an important thing to recognize, and especially in Zoom groups too, because they're already part of that same community. They don't, have to sort of they're not coming from different places, different walks of life that it might be the case if you bring in a community group, a sample. For the groups. But anyway, that's the parent group. And the student group, they're pulled from the class. It's all during the school hours. And they just find a time once per week over the course of 8 weeks. So each week there's one parent group, one child group. And then the teacher meetings are kind of interspersed.
I was going to ask, how far out do you think the benefits are sustained? For example, like when the program ends, I think you showed some follow-up data, but
Yeah.
I didn't really focus on that too well. So
Right, so the
yeah.
parents, we have pretty good indication that that can be sustained into the next year. We did do a few booster groups. I mean, we tried to, maybe each exposed to one booster group. But they did continue to find benefit relative to usual care out into the next school year, which was in the fall. The teacher sustained effects, sustained in that they didn't significantly worsen from their post-treatment, from immediately after treatment. But the problem we had was finding a difference between the usual care group and the treated group. So they sort of became closer because our usual care group, primarily because our usual care group got better. Well, how long is that going to last? I don't know. But there is, maybe a novelty effect of the new school year, maybe a variety of things, we don't know. My hunch on all of this is that there will need to be follow-up. We're not talking about curing a condition here. But the idea is hopefully the parents have learned strategies that can sustain them over time, and if they need additional help, they might be more apt to go get it because they had this positive experience. So there's that
And
to
then
think
just real
about.
quick, I was surprised to hear you say just a minute ago I mean, to me, it seemed kind of infrequent, actually. Only once a week, right, for the
Once a
for the
week.
kids and the parents?
Once a week for the kids and the parents, yeah, that's what it was, once a
So
week.
did people say they wanted more frequent? Because I could imagine more intensive, actually.
No, but they are getting, the kids are getting the daily report card every day, right? It's called daily report. So they're getting that reinforcement every day at school and potentially at home because the parents are implementing the, yeah. So it's kind of the parents and the teachers become the treatment providers.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with a promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.